Hello and welcome or welcome back to the channel. My tour of this tiny island nation has proven to me that it well deserves the name given to it during World War II, Fortress Malta. It's about 12% the size of the smallest American state of Rhode Island and has more fortifications than you can shake a stick at, including at least 50 major sites here and on the neighboring island of Gozo. The big three are probably the walled cities, Valletta, the Cittadella in Gozo, and Mdina. Today let's look at Mdina, a fascinating walled city. Today on the Armchair Traveler. My name is Judy and I love travel, history, and finding out what makes people tick. If you're enjoying my content, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your help means more people will see my content. If you want more information, I have a WordPress blog, a page on Facebook, and a Twitter handle. The addresses are here or in the information block at the bottom of the screen. Thank you and enjoy your visit. My military historian always counsels me that no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and nowhere is this truer than sightseeing. I had initially planned to visit Mdina during my first 5-day stay here on the island at the beginning of this trip, but I racked my back and lost almost 30 hours bedridden. Fortunately, I got a second chance toward the end of my cruise, which stopped in Valletta for a day. I chose the excursion to Mdina. It was supposed to include St. Paul's catacombs next door in Rabat, but for reasons never explained to me, that part fell through. Our first stop turned out to be a lovely botanical garden called the San Antone Gardens. After my time in close-in, barren Valletta, I can understand why these gardens were so popular. The Grand Master of the Knights of St. John Hospitaller, Antoine de Paul, built them in the 17th century to complement and surround his personal summer residence. The palace here is now the official residence of the President of Malta. Walking around gives you an idea of how different this area is from downtown Valletta and much of the area around the coastline, which for all its historical and architectural glory is essentially solid rock. There are trees, shade, water features, and more. The first thing we saw here was a botanical clinic in a field of rather healthy-looking, blooming petunias. This was my first clue that the microclimate in this area must be quite different and much better than what I saw in the drier and browner landscape in and around Valletta, or even on the bus here. There are ponds, stream-fed, not from wells, or so I was told. Those turtles you see next to the statue aren't carvings. Those are live turtles. The Domus Romana was our second stop, just outside the fortress. The building apparently dated from the 1st century BCE and was probably the townhouse for a member of the wealthy Roman elite who ruled the area, although so far archaeologists haven't been able to put an owner's name to it. When it was first erected, the building actually sat inside the walls of the Roman city, which was significantly larger than the fortress we see today. Today it's in the suburb of Rabat. As you can see from this image of the general area, not much remains above ground, but a great deal can be learned from the foundation and the artifacts left behind. Archaeologists tell us it had several rooms around a central atrium in the form of a colonnaded peristyle open to the elements where the residents could collect rainwater. Most of the artifacts were eventually gathered up into this rebuilt museum, designed to show us what the exterior of the original domus or house might have looked like. From here, our tour guide hurried us on to the main entrance of the fortress, which is where we'll go next. Mdina is a small walled city and the former capital of Malta. It covers a bit more than 220 acres, somewhat larger than the area inside the walls of Valletta, and like Valletta has a much larger neighbor or suburb, this time called Rabat. The fortress sits on a hill about 650 feet above sea level, making it the highest elevation on the island. You can see a long way from here on a clear day, which made it prime defensible military territory. The basic story here is wave after wave of conquerors, each one of which settled in, and each of which was in turn dumped out. It's been going on since the Bronze Age. The Phoenicians arrived, dumped out whoever was living on this nice hill, and built their city. As far as I can tell, they and their immediate successors, the Carthaginians, left no trace except the original name, Malith, which means shelter or haven. The Romans arrived in 281 BCE, took command, strengthened the defenses, and renamed the city Melita from the Latin word for honey. The Arabs showed up in 870 CE, strengthened the defenses, and renamed the city Mdina, which means the city. The Normans took control in 1091, seriously improved the defenses, but they left the name as it was and remains to this day. In 1530, the Knights of St. John arrived to take ownership. The Knights by this time had very strong naval interests, a fleet, and needed to be on or near the water. They chose to settle on the Grand Harbor in a then tiny fishing village called Burgu, which they promoted and made the capital. The city fathers here in Mdina were displeased by that, but just retreated inside the walls basically to sulk and wait to see what happened. The knights strengthened the walls some and garrisoned the city with their cavalry, but Mdina was secondary to their interests. Every conqueror in turn has recognized that just as they had overthrown their predecessors, the same thing could happen to them. The one thing they all did alike was to strengthen the defenses of this walled city. This is a view of the Mdina wall and the bridge over a moat leading to the city gate. In the medieval period, the main entryway to Mdina was through a gate located here on the southeastern side of the city. It provided access to travelers, traders, and visitors entering the city, which was the capital of Malta during that time. Calling that dry ditch that you see here a moat is a little misleading. It dates back to the Arab period and was built to separate Mdina, the fortified city we're visiting today, from Rabat, today's much larger suburb. The Normans actually widened the ditch. It was never filled with water and today is landscaped with gardens and plantings. During the time of the Knights' control of the city, Mdina was a fortress and home for the Knights' cavalry. The Knights didn't have the men to garrison it properly, but the Arabs never quite figured that part out and never succeeded in taking the city. Their very existence here was a huge security hole. The Grand Master was able to pass messages to his colleagues in Europe by sending his messengers to Mdina first. While the cavalry was making a royal pain in the neck of itself, the walls were manned, so to speak, in some cases by women, dressed up in men's clothing. Apparently the Turks never could tell the difference. The area here suffered a major earthquake in 1693, which might explain the new main gate, built in 1724 in a Baroque style to replace an earlier medieval gate which had been walled up and is no longer in use. It's called the Valletta Gate after the Grand Master who built it and whose coat of arms sits on top of the entryway. You can just see the area of the older gate on the right of my photograph. Walled cities normally have more than one entryway, and gates always have more than one face, one facing out and one facing in. What you see here is the inner facing of the main gate, featuring three patron saints of the island, Saints Publius on the left, St. Paul in the center, and St. Agatha. Publius was the Roman governor of Malta, who, the story goes, welcomed Paul here after his shipwreck. This photo gives you an idea of those narrow, winding streets here inside the fortress. It was actually impossible for me to take a good photograph facing the entryway of this church. The streets are just too narrow. From a distance, however, you can catch the bell tower of Mdina's Carmelite church. It's impossible to tell much about the exterior shape of the church, but Google Earth lets the proverbial cat out of the bag. The church is not square or rectangular. It was built with an elliptical plan, and it actually includes a dome. This was the first church in Malta built to this plan. Construction began around 1660 with a design by a French military engineer named Médéric Blondel de Croizet. Blondel was, as far as I can tell, not a member of the Order of St. John, but like the Knights was current with developments in arts and science in the rest of Europe. This church is Baroque from beginning to end and inside and out, and is known for its elaborate decorations and dramatic use of light and color. Unfortunately, we don't know much about what else, if anything, Blondel designed, either here in Malta or elsewhere. Although as a military engineer, he would have worked on things like city walls, bastions, and other defensive structures. This church, however, helped shape the Baroque style for all of the island. The interior of the church, now greatly restored, is far more impressive than the exterior, at least in my opinion. A great deal of work has been required, not just because of the weather, geology, or time. Construction began, as I mentioned, in 1660 or a bit later. The interior features a lovely dome painting, now extensively restored, although we don't know who painted it. The church houses paintings by the greats of the day, including Matteo Preti and Stefano Erardi, whose altar painting you see here, as well as sculpture and frescoes. For a time after the earthquake in 1693, this church, which suffered less damage, doubled as a temporary cathedral of the city. During the French occupation of 1798, the church was robbed of its silver and other valuables, but all of that has now been restored. This ceiling fresco painting by Mdina Preti shows the shipwreck of St. Paul. Built, or rather rebuilt after that disastrous earthquake, this is the exterior of St. Paul's of Mdina, one of the oldest churches in the country. Like the Carmelite church, it was built in the Baroque style from the beginning, and features 2 bell towers and 2 clocks on the facade facing the main square of the city. This was not the first church on this nice flat spot. The original cathedral dated back to the 12th century. Tradition says this is where Roman governor and later saint Publius met St. Paul after his shipwreck on Malta. Unfortunately, like so much else, the original cathedral was badly damaged in the 1693 earthquake. It was dismantled. I'm sure much of the building material was recycled and rebuilt here in the style you see. It was designed by a Maltese architect named Lorenzo Gaffa and is considered his masterpiece. The interior of St. Paul's is absolutely stunning. Every surface that you look at is either made or faced with marble or covered with frescoes and gilt. There's also stained glass, statues, and carvings. When you look up, you'll see an impressive barrel-vaulted ceiling decorated with still more frescoes. Like the interior of St. John's Co-Cathedral in Valletta, the cathedral houses notable artwork, including paintings by Mdina Preti, the renowned Baroque artist. The best-known artwork in the interior is probably his version of the Conversion of St. Paul, shown on the vault of the apse of the cathedral. My photograph doesn't begin to do it justice. This photo is from the times of Malta. Preti, who was known as Il Cavaliere Calabrese because he was actually born in the Italian boot, was a prominent Italian Baroque artist who spent a significant part of his career in Malta, where he produced numerous masterpieces for churches and palaces. The Conversion of St. Paul is celebrated for its dramatic composition and the vivid portrayal of the biblical scene depicting the moment when St. Paul experienced his divine revelation and converted to Christianity. Today, the cathedral, unlike the Carmelite church, faces a rather impressive open square. This wasn't always the case, however. Until the 18th century, this area was a large block full of all kinds of buildings. Eventually, the cathedral managed to buy and demolish those buildings. Aside from the cathedral, you can see the Gurgione Palace. It's an 18th century Baroque building and was originally a private home. The facade, like so much else in Malta, is made of native Maltese limestone. Malta is a small island, and Mdina sits up on a hill, so on a clear day, like the one when I visited, you can see the sea. The dome you see in the distance, almost in the center of my photo, is called Mosta Dome, also known as the Rotunda of Mosta, although this isn't the interesting side of it. It was designed by Giorgio Gronier de Vos and was based on the Parthenon in Rome. Construction was much later, however. Work began in 1833 and it was completed sometime in the 1860s. During World War II, a German bomb fell through the dome and into the sanctuary but did not explode. The people who were there and many others considered this a miracle. They display a replica of the bomb to remind themselves of the event. The black and white image you see here shows members of the bomb disposal unit with the 500-kilogram bomb that penetrated the dome but failed to explode. A bomb that size is close to half of an American long ton. The church, unlike the Pantheon, was built of Maltese limestone, not entirely reinforced concrete. The limestone is actually known for its durability, but the dome was unsupported. A blast like this could easily have destroyed the entire structure. Mesquita Square, which is located quite close to the cathedral, has retained its medieval design and was the last stop here inside the fortress. The name translates to Moskea, which actually means mosque, not mosquito, although there's no sign of a mosque today. It's just a big public square. If you happen to be a Game of Thrones fan, however, this was the shooting location for the exterior of Littlefinger's brothel in the King's Landing. I hope you enjoyed your walking visit to Mdina. Come back next time for another adventure with me, the Armchair Traveler.